And welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, Associate Editor of Audioholics, and I am here with...
Rob H, and both of us are a little bit ill. Tom's nauseated, and I've got a little bit of a cough, so there might be a whole lot of mute button on this podcast.
Stupid son got me sick. I do
Uh,
have I'm not saying that I only have one stupid son. I don't want to make it sound like I've only got one. I've got three sons, and they're all sort of have their moments. But the one that got me sick is the cute one, so I forgive him already. I'm trying to get myself situated in this chair, which I should have done before I started this podcast. But let's see here. I do have a wired connection. I did finally wire up my thing. I actually rolled back my the operating system from 10.9 suck, whatever that was for Mac, back to Lion, which is 10.75-ish or something like that. I don't know. Whatever it is, so much better. Things actually work. Like I press a
I'm
button.
glad.
Oh my God, Rob! You don't even know. It was so bad. It was so awful. I would press a button and nothing would happen. I would just sit there and stare at my screen. I was like, I expected that AOL sound to happen, or the dial-up,
Hmm.
as everything was trying to happen. It was awful. So now things work, and I used to remember. I remember thinking how bad I thought Line was as far as speed. I'm like, oh my God, I did not know how good I had it. So I'm very glad. I only lost a handful of emails, which I think I got most of this back, and I updated everything, and I'm pretty okay. It was a fairly uncomfortable 8 or so hours in my house as I figured it, rolled everything back and was really stressed out. And every time somebody talked to me, I snapped at them because I think it was Liz, wasn't it Liz, who said that she and her husband had a policy when they were like an upgrade. It wasn't an upgrade, but it was like a project policy. Whenever one of them was working on the project, the other one wasn't allowed to talk to him
I
because
I don't recall that offhand, but it very well might have been the case.
I love that idea. I love this. Daddy's in the project. Daddy's in the project. Don't talk to him until he's done. And I think that should be a rule in my house because I need that. I need that badly. So, what's been going on with you, dude?
Not too much. Once again, time has flown by. We're both seemingly underprepared for this particular episode, but we will make our way through it. Tom doesn't want to go 2 hours this week, so we'll see how far we get.
Tom wants a lot of things in life. So, yeah. Tom rarely gets what he wants, so we'll just see how this goes. I know my autistic brother is not happy that I'm spending 2 hours in here every week, but it's not it's my house. Get the heck out. I don't mean that really, kind of do. All right. Anyhow, I watched. The reason we started a little bit late this week is because I found out that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is on tonight. I never saw the episode, so I watched the episode and it kind of sucked. And I was like, for a program about superheroes or superpower people, wasn't a whole lot of superpowers going on. There was like basically none. At the very
Well,
end, somebody with a glowy stick showed up, and I was like,
yeah, the past 2 or 3 episodes were much better off the back of Captain America, Winter Soldier, which had a whole bunch of big changes for the entire Marvel universe, and so Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. sort of piggybacked off that and had some good episodes. So I don't know, I haven't watched tonight's episode yet, so yeah,
well, I wasn't all that impressed. There
maybe
was
it's back to not being so great. I don't
a
know.
lot of talking. I don't care about the lot of talking. I like interpersonal stuff. That's fine. I think that's what killed the Sarah Connor Chronicles, though. They're like, hey, we don't have any more money for Terminator, so why don't you go back to school and get in a fight with your girlfriend? That's awful. Let's not do that. All right, this week we have Steve to thank for supporting the podcast. Steve, our listener of the week. This is different than Steven from last week. Apparently, you guys come at us waves. So
There are
we've
like
been...
other Steves to mention too. There are so many Steves and Stevens, and I'm sorry if we mix you up because everybody's named Steve apparently,
Oh, we've been through all the Garys. We're now moving on to the Steves.
and the
So,
Michaels.
and the Michaels. That's right. That's right. I forgot about the Michaels. That's right. How could I
Yep.
forget about the Michaels? So, yes. We do have a lot of stuff to talk about this week. Let me just glance through the topic list real fast here. If you have a subwoofer and you are concerned about the settings of your subwoofer, this is the podcast for you, dude. We're going to help you out because apparently that's what everybody else is worried about, too. We're also going to be talking about separates versus receivers. That's going to come up more than once, I think, in this podcast. We've got some speaker suggestions based on stuff people have won. Should they keep it or not? We've also got some more suggestions from listeners. Somebody asked Paradigm about their low frequency extension DIN rating versus their frequency response rating, and they got a response from Paradigm that they go, okay, well, I don't know what that means, so we're going to explain it. So that's going to be things that's going to happen. People are hearing voices from their subwoofers. I think we mentioned this last week, but we didn't get to it. So I'm fairly certain that the old priest and the young priest have thrown holy water at it and is still doing it, so it must be technical and not supernatural. There's other things. Projection screens.
Oh yeah, that's a big topic if we get to it.
Nick, if we get all the way down to you, if we get all the way down to you, which I doubt, but if we do get all the way down to you, we'll probably push you to next week anyway. So Nick, there's still hope that we might get to you, but let's not be crazy and go overboard. But yes, we will try to get to everybody, as we always try to get to everybody, and keep those questions coming. You can email us at rob@avrant.com, tom@avrant.com. You go to the website, and does the posting work on the website, Rob?
It has so far. I posted 12 links last week because we mentioned many things that I said we would link to, and so I did. That is the most I've ever done, and they all work, so yay WordPress.
Yay WordPress. So WordPress is still up and running. I haven't broken that yet, recently at least. So avrant.com is the website, facebook.com/avrantpodcast. If you want to interact with us on Facebook, which people are doing, and we are answering, and Rob is being his normal brief and succinct self over there, as he often is.
Yeah, I answered quite a few.
People are always shocked. Like every once in a while I get an email from somebody, like, Rob sent me this really long email, I feel bad. Should I give him some money or something? Like, yeah, you should give him some money. But that's not you, dude. That's just him. That's what he does. He's a long emailer. I'm like that with answering machines. Like, I can't just leave it short. Like, hey, call me back. It's always like, got to be a production. I have to make it into a deal. I don't know. That's just me.
Yes.
Twitter.
I didn't get a chance to thank Steve, by the way, so thank you, Steve, for the donation. If you would like to donate, avrant.com, there is the donation link there under the guise of buying us a cup of coffee. And so there it is. It's a PayPal donation. Yay!
So far, we haven't actually bought any coffee with it, but we have paid for hosting. So there's that. Someone suggested we use Libsyn. We're already using Libsyn. Libsyn is very cheap, so that's why we do it. If someone got something cheaper than Libsyn, I probably can't switch because then the old podcast will go away, and that would be bad. Let's see here. Last at Twitter at First Reflect for Rob, or at avrant_Tom for me. Seeing how last week I couldn't even hardly say that by the end of the podcast, I imagine that's going to be the same thing this week, so I'm pretty tired. All right. Steve, thank you again. On Facebook, we have Jack, who I guess we talked about last week with his older Outlaw Audio sub, and he wanted to know whether or not he could pair the new one with the old one and from Outlaw Audio, and Rob said yes, and I said sure. And so he's done that. He's already ordered it, but now that he's got a pair of Outlaw subs and his Hyperion Intimus speakers, should he upgrade his? Oh, is this one of the separate questions, isn't it?
Yep, we're already barreling right into it.
I know, we're going right into it. Should we, or do we need to condense these into, or are we just going to like hit them as we go? We just want to go in order. Let's just go in order.
Yeah, let's just go in order. Otherwise, we'll get lost.
We'll get lost again. All right.
Because we're that organized.
His Onkyo TXNR809 AV receiver. Would separates or a higher end receiver make a big difference? Okay. That's the first question. The second question is, I'm reading the second question because someone answer it first because it's easier. They're both easy. He's using the Auralex Gramma risers, which are those foam. It has a foam on the bottom and then like a little platform, and you put your sub on top of it, and it mechanically decouples, which means your subwoofer, when it shakes around, those vibrations do not transfer through the subwoofer into the floor. It goes into the Gramma riser with the little foam feet. It's not little, big foam feet, and that absorbs all that vibration, and then that gets transferred through. That helps from keeping your neighbors being angry at you and or wife. Considering that his LFM1 and his new LFM1 Plus are down firing. This is when you have feet that raise it off the ground, and there's a driver on the bottom, and it fires towards the ground.
Downward to get to the floor.
These are also ported, though, right? Do they have?
They are ported. The ports are on the back.
Oh, I hate back ports.
Oh
Yeah.
wait, no, this is outlaw. The ports are on the bottom too.
Oh, well, there you go. Even better.
Yeah.
Since they're it's a down firing sub, is it a good idea to use the Gamma risers? Rob will say.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, HSU, Dr. Shii would be the proper pronunciation, Dr. Su, he specifically said that he has designed the subwoofers that both HSU and Outlaw sell to work best when they're firing into a short pile carpet. So not a perfectly hardwood floor and not a big thick carpet, but a short pile carpet is what he thinks is the best surface. And guess what is covering a Gamma riser? It's some short pile carpet. So,
is it really? I thought it was like a velvet. It's a velvet.
It's like industrial carpet, basically.
I don't.
So there it is. It's like the perfect surface. So
anyhow,
absolutely
yes.
keep those Gammas in place.
It'll work just fine. Don't worry about that. That's true. Basically, it's true of every sub, no matter which direction it fires. As long as it's not so big that the feet, like, go off the side of the pad, so that your driver is now resting directly on the pad. That
would not be good.
That would not be good. But as long as the subwoofer fits on top of the thing, you'll be fine. Now, back to his first question. Now he's got the 2 subs and the speakers. Should he upgrade his receiver to a higher end receiver or separates? No. That's pretty much my answer. Because there's nothing in this question that makes me think he needs to. Okay.
Yeah.
If the question was, hey, I've now got a bunch of speakers, and I want to have a 7.1, and my receiver is 5.1. Should I upgrade? Yes. I want to run my sub stereo, and I only have a mono output on my receiver. Should I upgrade my receiver? Yes. I want Bluetooth compatibility. I want Apple AirPlay. I want streaming. I want Netflix. I want something feature that my receiver doesn't have. Yes. But do you need to upgrade your receiver because you got some more speakers? No. No, there's no. In fact, especially considering his speakers, there's amps in your subs, so that as long as you're giving it a clean signal from the receiver, you absolutely don't need to upgrade for your subs. It's already got its own amp. The amps in the receiver aren't making any difference. His speakers are appearing intimates. They're going to have no problems with mid-grade receivers and up, or even really entry-level receivers. I don't think would have a problem powering these speakers. Unless it's a huge room, I guess maybe might be an issue. Probably not. So, yeah, I'm not seeing anything in this question that makes me think Is it just because he got the extra sub that he wants another receiver?
Well, I mean, I think he's got a bit of the upgrade-itis, and I can't blame anyone for that.
That's
an affliction.
Hey, well, you might be patient zero of the upgrade-itis. Yeah, Rob sees a new speaker, so ooh, maybe I should own that too, along with all the other stuff in my house that I don't.
Look at the ribbons. They're pretty ribbons. Yeah, I mean, he's already got an Onkyo 809. That is already a very capable receiver. Like Tom's saying, if there's a particular feature that you want that the 809 doesn't have, maybe the highest version of Odyssey, XT32 with sub-EQ-HT, there's a feature the 809 doesn't have, and if that's something you really, really want, well, okay. I mean, we will always say, it's your money. You absolutely have our permission to upgrade if you really want to, just because you want a new feature or you just want something that looks different. But in terms of will getting separates or a higher-end receiver than the 809 make a big, huge audible improvement in your sound with those particular speakers and the 2 subs, it really won't make any difference. My answer is nope. No, it really won't be anything too drastic. I'm not going to say you cannot possibly hear any difference in sound. You certainly could, but it's not going to be a big, gigantic woohoo change. So,
No. And I actually missed that in his question. Would separates or a higher end receiver make a big difference? No, that was almost never the case. The only time your receiver, receivers and amplifiers within receivers these days, it's a very mature technology. Okay, every once in a while somebody plays around with something funky and different, like Pioneer did the digital amp thing for like 1 year, then said, "Woo, no one bought that," and stopped. So it's a pretty mature technology. So you will know if you're having a problem. You're having a problem. Your receiver's getting hot. You're hearing clipping someplace. You're having to turn your volume way, way, way up. Your speakers sound weird, like literally, there's some distortion or something that's going on.
Mhm.
These are all signs that yes, you might need an upgrade. But if you can hear everything perfectly fine, your volume stays at a reasonable level, you don't have to jack it way, way up in order to get the power that you need to power your speakers in your great big ginormous room. It should just sound exactly the same. Just have a better feature set, and should be easier to. You might not have to turn it up quite as loud if you get bigger amps. But really, even separates. I'm sorry to say that, but a lot of people think you're going to get separates and everything's going to be like, oh, no. Unless you're having a problem, it should just sound the same, or very similar. I mean, and then
Yeah.
once again, and if it sounds different, is it good that it sounds different?
Yeah, I mean, I know I can predict we're probably going to be getting quite a few people asking about separates. I think because we love them over at the HT Guys, the HTTV and Home Theater Podcast, Ara and Braden. On their past couple of recent episodes, they've been getting into separates. They reviewed some separates from New Force and were raving about them, the performance, and so now they're all gung-ho about separates, and I think that's going to have a lot of people saying, okay, now I need to upgrade my receiver to separates. I mean, I don't want to say anything. I mean, I believe them that they heard a difference, but here's the thing. Those New Force separates that they reviewed, New Force advertises how much processing they do to the signals. They like to throw all kinds of different processing at things to try and differentiate themselves. So on the preamplifier side, it's kind of likely that they actually are doing some additional processing to the signal. On the other side, the amplifier that they reviewed over there at the HT Guys was a Class D amplifier. This is not your traditional Class AB amplifier that you find almost everywhere else. So I believe them that they heard a difference. Like Tom says, is it necessarily a good difference? Because maybe it wasn't as linear. Maybe it had more high-frequency detail because it was actually boosting the high frequencies a little bit, like a lot of Class D amps tend to do. So,
And once again, it
yeah, a
doesn't
little
really
bit
matter. If you think it sounds good, it sounds good. Okay? And if the HT guys think it sounds good, it sounds good. I've got no problems with that. And this all comes into the sort of idea of these EQs. You know, we get these people who talk about speaker cables sounding different. They're like, okay, well, it can happen, but usually it's in the one direction. It's either not altering the sound or it is altering the sound. And the alter, by definition, is an EQ, and that EQ is by definition not the most linear that it could have been. It could have been linear, and it's not. Now, the same thing we're talking about, well, he says he's got an Onkyo. Well, maybe he wants to switch to Yamaha because he wants to hear the YPOW system, their version of the room correction.
Sure.
You know, I'm telling you, with the separates, I put the separates in here. I've got like a 8-year-old receiver. You just put it on pure direct, straight through, all that stuff, basically sound the same. Why? Small room, easy to drive speakers, I almost said a bad word, big subwoofers. You know, that really are doing a lot to make the bass a lot more even. Now, if I was in a much bigger room and I had harder to drive speakers, I would say yes, I need separates. But in this room with these speakers, I don't need it. I need like a mid-level receiver, and that's just because of the features I want, not because of the amplifier power or anything else. So let's put that sort of idea of whether or not the separates can make a difference aside and just say, if all things being equal, it should be what comes out of your source should be what comes out of your speakers. Then the rest of it is your room, okay? And if in that chain someplace, if you change something, you hear a major difference, you EQ'd it. You may not have meant to, or you may have meant to, or whatever. Someplace there's some EQing going on. If you like it, that's fine. If you don't like it, well, then you should, you know, or if it's just different for the sake of being different, well, then fine, different, whatever. All right. Next, you went to go see Paul again about his Big Ugly Dish.
Yep. So this whole transition over to the FTA, that is the free-to-air digital satellite system, it's proving to be quite the challenge. Paul has another friend, Andrew, who is trying to handle all of the reprogramming of the old box that controls the physical movement of the big, big dish that's set up in his yard. And so managed to get a nice, big, fancy, proper-looking list of all the satellites that we should be able to aim at. That much is in there. The positions did not seem to be, so might have to do it manually. In other words, figure out where one of them is and then just move it over to the east and the west until we bump into the next one in the list. That could be tedious.
You're playing hunt. It's like find the needle in the haystack, but with satellites and in space. That's your plan.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Even though you're thinking, hey, here's a nice big dish that's I don't know how many feet across, 8 or 10 feet across. It's a big dish. Those satellites are up in space. They still have a pretty narrow little beam where you have to get it aimed spot on. So, yeah, that's proving difficult. But the most difficult thing is this stupid little FTA box, the thing that actually gets the signal and translates the digital signals into picture and sound. That stupid little thing is flaking out so much. So over on Facebook, Paul has let us know that he has actually contacted the people who make it, and they're sending him a replacement. Looking forward to that, because I'm getting tired of the thing powering off and never powering back on and trying to cycle itself and flashing red, green, and never coming back to life. So
it kind of sounds like he is there only the one option? Is there only this one little box, or did he get the cheap one? And
I don't know. This seems to be the one that's talked about most on the forums that discuss such things. So
are they talking about how much it sucks? Because maybe they're talking about that.
Most people were saying it's working. They think it just has some sort of software problem. So he's getting a replacement. But more fun than that, we played around a bit with some of his ham radio stuff, which is something I really know almost nothing about. So that was fun. He wanted to give a shout out to Heil Sound, which is the company that he got his headset from. So it was fun sort of listening in on that and the microphone and whatnot that's there. Very difficult to drive headphones, by the way, because I tried just plugging them into like an iPod player and had to turn the volume all the way up to hear almost anything. So those are not exactly efficient, but work well for ham radio. They're not meant for regular listening. But more than that, Paul and I had a good discussion. It's something I wanted to touch upon. We sort of talked about it a little bit a few episodes ago, but it's just something that totally bears repeating, which is that just in casual talking, Paul was saying, he's dropped by some of the hangouts that we have afterwards. He listens to the podcast, on a regular basis, and he's saying sometimes doesn't totally get all the technical things that we're talking about and feels a little bit intimidated because I totally get that. You're listening to something, this is something you're into, you like it, but you're hearing something that we're talking about and going, I don't quite exactly understand all of it, and I feel a little bit intimidated to ask because I don't want to poke my head up and, be embarrassed by not knowing this. Please, everyone, I more than anything, I don't want anyone to ever feel that way. Please, please ask. I mean, obviously, all we're doing these days is answering listener questions, and we love it so much. We're having so much fun. We love that we've been able to do this and that we're getting as many questions as we are, and we would love to have the most basic questions come into us because stuff that we call basic isn't like you're not born knowing any of it. It's not like inherent knowledge. So if there's anything you ever want to ask, please feel free to write to us, rob@avrant.com, tom@avrant.com, and ask. We really want to answer those questions. So.
Yep. And stop by the Hangouts too. I know a lot of people get intimidated at the Hangouts. So we record these at 9 o'clock-ish on Tuesday nights Eastern time, and afterwards we have a Hangout, which we may or may not have tonight because, like I said, I'm not feeling well. So most nights we do have a Hangout. We all sit around and talk. A lot of times someone will show up and they just kind of sit there, and I feel bad. I try to say hi to everybody when they arrive and everything, and they kind of go. And
there's all the lag and garbled issues on Google Voice sometimes, so that doesn't
the Hangouts can sometimes be a bit of an issue. But I always try to give them an opportunity, give everybody an opportunity to ask their question, because you didn't come here just to listen to us talk some more. I hope. But maybe you did. But if you didn't, and you really have a question, just feel free to jump right in. And I know we can get kind of like a couple of times it was home automation for like an hour straight. I'm like, even I'm bored. But we talked about headphones. I think we've talked about a lot about streaming HD music and whether or not you can hear a difference between the real high end stuff and the not high end stuff. And one of our listeners who shows up there regularly, Gabe, could talk about that. I think he'd do a whole podcast just by himself, like not a podcast episode, but like a podcast about that sort of stuff. Which, hey, if you want to record an episode, Gabe, you've got all the gear. Feel free to let me know, and we'll post one up for you. Anyways,
so yeah, just another
stop by.
Another really quick thing that Paul mentioned that I think is a really good thing is he was saying sometimes it's like not the first time he heard us explain something, not the second time he heard us explain something, but the third or the fourth time he heard us explain something, it clicked and he got it and it made sense. And so that is something that really bugs me on forums. You go to AVS or any of the other popular forums online, and you'll see someone ask a question, and there's always that dumb person who answers, and one of the first people who answers because apparently all they do is spend all their time on the boards. And they say, do a search. Somebody else has already asked that question. You should already know this. Go Google it. And it's like, I hate that. I hate that attitude. We will never ever do that on this podcast. We will answer the same question over and over because sometimes that's it is. It's the fourth or fifth time you hear it. Suddenly it makes sense.
Listeners all the time. We get inconsistent listeners who come and they listen to an episode here or there. I understand that. All right, let's move on. This is quick questions and updates.
They are.
They
are really.
Gary thought it was funny we were saying to just turn the sharpness control off last week, but he wanted to make sure that we clarified, which is I think that we did say this, but let's make sure that we'll say it again, like second or third time that you get it. The proper way to set sharpness is to use a test pattern, which you can usually get on those. Don't they usually have that on the THX one too?
Yep, it's usually part of that package there, or any of the popular setup discs, Digital Video Essentials, Spears and Munsell, the Disney Wow disc, any of those will have a sharpness test pattern.
Basically, they'll have like a line, and they'll say adjust your sharpness until you can't see a line next to that line. Basically, because that's what sharpness does. It puts a line next to a line. But like we said last week. And what Gary wants us to reiterate here is that it's not always 0. Off is not always synonymous with 0. It might be 50, it might be 75, it might be 63, it might be 42. You'll have to use the test pattern to check it out. That's the easiest way to do it. If not, then you can just put a static image up there that preferably has a lot of black lines on it and play with it until you see them. This is one thing about TV calibration that kind of surprised me when I first started doing it. You kind of think that, okay, well, I sit over here, so I'll calibrate from over here. You do not calibrate from your seat. You calibrate from like as close as you can get to that stupid thing. You want to be like right up on it. It's like everybody see the pixels and everything. You want to be right there next to it. I sometimes don't even use the remote if I can get away with it. I just use the buttons on the front of the TV because that's how close you are when you are calibrating these things. So
nose to screen.
Nose to screen is where you want to be when you're calibrating. So get up on that thing, man. Look for that line next to that line and go, "Be gone, you! You shall not pass." Okay. There we go. That was a little excessive. Michael, one of our many Michaels, wanted to add monitor audio to the list of tower speaker manufacturers with a good $500 pair offering in their MR series. I don't ever mention monitor audio. 2 reasons. One, that they flat out refuse to give us anything to review. They just won't do it. And you know what? That does not mean I don't like them. I've heard their speakers here or there, but I just don't have as much experience with them as the people that'll send me review samples. Even people who send me stuff and I go, it's kind of crappy, I will at least now have some experience with them and be able to talk about them from a place of knowledge. As opposed to monitor audio is like, nope, not interested in you. So, and the other thing is they're expensive, but Rob, they're not.
Well, Monitor Audio is one of the few companies. They're a UK-based company, as far as I know. So they're one of the companies where, over in Europe and in Canada, for whatever reason, the availability and prices are actually better here than they are in the US. It's one of the few situations that's like that. So we have plenty of listeners who are in Europe or in Canada, so it can be worth talking about brands that aren't necessarily as popular in the U.S. but might actually be more popular and even more affordable up here in Canada. So that's a good suggestion. Most of the monitor audio speakers I've ever heard I've liked quite a bit. So the MR series is their least expensive series, but it's another good addition to the list if you're looking for inexpensive towers. Yeah, I did want to piggyback on that a little bit though, coming off last week. Even though Tom calls this cheating, I didn't mention
when we're looking when somebody asks us for a recommendation. You go, well, you can get accessories for less. Like,
yes.
Shut up. We're going to MSRP when somebody asks us for a recommendation.
Real world. But yeah, accessories for less. They do sell speakers as well. They carry brands like Boston Acoustics, KEF, Focal. So those are all good brands with very good offerings. They don't carry the full line because again, they're only selling things that are marked as refurbished, that they're getting directly from the manufacturers. They still come with a manufacturer's warranty. But yeah, if you're looking for speakers, don't forget about looking at accessories for less as well because they got some pretty good discounts on some pretty nice speakers.
Yeah, the monitor audio is, I've only heard them a little bit, and I kind of always lumped them in with the Canadian speakers. They have that sort of Paradigm-ish sound, but I always thought they were a little bit warmer than Paradigms.
British sound, man, British sound. Yeah. They might even be Scottish. Gosh, I can't remember. I should have looked that up, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they're UK-based anyway.
Yeah, I think, you know what? Like I said, they should send me a pair. I mean, I don't want to keep them. I'm not going to put them up on eBay. I just want to listen to them a little bit and then do a little review and then send them right back to you. So I'd be interested in hearing their speak. I'd be interested in hearing all speakers. I just love this stuff. I could literally do this all day long. The worst part of this job is all the mail. That's the worst part. Is just having to go take everything out of the box. Like when SVS sent you a sub, you're just like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to put that back in that box. It's gonna be awful, And that's that's
the double box. Yes.
Oh god, don't get me started on that PB 2000. I just want to shoot myself. Michael also says that he wrote to Paradigm to ask about the low frequency extension DIN rating, which is what they use for mostly nowadays. What they're using for their frequency response ratings. They're the only one that does that because. Paradigm special versus their frequency response rating where they state a plus or minus 2 dB. Their response was that the DIN rating is the lowest frequency in a real room, while the frequency response rating is in an anechoic chamber. Michael was a little confused as to why the speakers would not play as low in an anechoic chamber where there is no noise. Michael, there is no noise because there's no reflections in an anechoic chamber. If you've ever seen an anechoic chamber, and you can Google this if you can spell anechoic, because it takes me about 3 goes before I get it right. But basically, it could be big, and like the one at Boston Acoustics is pretty big. But a lot of times they're small. You can barely fit a speaker in there. It's like a little closet thing that you can get in there. And then they have like these big foam wedge cone things in there, and there's no reflections. Okay, that means that the what you measure at that microphone is 100% direct sound, no reflected sound in the anechoic chamber. Okay, one of the things that we talk about with subwoofers all the time is how when you put them in a room, you're going to get, first of all, you're going to get a slightly lower bass because you're going to get room reinforcement. That's those sound waves bouncing around your room, some of them adding, some of them subtracting to each other, all that stuff. So a lot of times with speakers we talk about if you put it too close to a wall, you get boundary reinforcement. What this is the sound that, very quickly, because the wall's right there, bouncing off that wall and then reinforcing that sound, and you get a little bit better bass out of it. That's why when people have crappy subwoofers, the first thing they say is, I put in the quarter, sounds great. Yeah. That's because they're getting as much boundary reinforcement as they can. They're getting 2 walls and the floor all at the same time. Okay? The reason why it plays lower is exactly that. The boundary reinforcement of the room is what you're getting. Now, the question that needs to be asked to Paradigm by every single one of us is, whose room is this DIN taking place? Is this low frequency extension DIN rating being rated at? Is it 10 feet by 11 feet by 8 feet? That would be a small bedroom here in the States. Or is it like, a 14-foot ceiling with 20 feet wide and 35 feet long? Is that it? Is it a bathroom? Is it a closet? Is it a dumbwaiter someplace? These are all rooms. And believe me, you will get
And
different measurements in every single one of them.
and how is it furnished, and what is it made out of, and how thick are the
Is it a
walls?
glass box, or is it, or is it one of those places where they put leather on the walls, or you know what I mean? You know, it's a useless measurement.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
since
useless.
since DIN is a actual German specifications board, there might actually be some description in the whatever specification, but there are thousands of DIN specifications. This is a little bit like ITU, right? There's thousands of specifications. I don't know which one Paradigm is using. So I don't know if the dimensions of the room are outlined, the construction of the room, how it's furnished, all that stuff. Again, basically, I mean, this isn't 100% on, but basically the DIN rating is very similar to the
We lost Rob. It's very sad. I wonder if anybody else can hear Rob. Can anybody else hear Rob? Is it just me?
we might be talking over each other or not. I'm not sure. Are you back,
No,
Tom?
I'm back. I think I was always there. I think you were gone. But
You were gone on my side, but anyway,
all right.
we're back.
I didn't talk over you. So what did you say?
Well, I said what I said, and folks will hear it. And
That's
we're
right.
done
So
now.
basically, yeah, no matter whatever specifications for DIN they're using, it's not your room, so it's useless to you unless you can figure out which one it is and it's actually your room. So you want the frequency response. Just look at that and then subtract 2 for your. You know what I mean? That's what I usually do. If it says it goes into 30, 28 in your room. Good, whatever. Anyway, all right. Steven, these are questions from last week. Now, Steven was our listener from last week who we had to push to this week because this question was going to be so long. He's looking to upgrade his AV processor. So that means he's already got amplifiers. He's already had a processor. I imagine he must, yes. So from his current 10-year-old Rotel RSP 1098, which I don't know what that is, but it's a processor, which has no EQ or auto setup and no HDMI at all, and is probably not unlike current Rotels, which probably have very little EQ and auto setup, and I'm sure they do have HDMI nowadays. They probably just got it last year.
One would hope.
Yeah. One of the great things about those specialty AV companies that are like, oh, this newfangled HDMI, we're not down with that, until people stop buying their crap and they go, we're going to totally do that, but we're only going to give you one, and then we're going to make it so you can completely turn it off if you're hardcore like we are. Anyhow, I don't know. Rotel might not be. I've reviewed Rotel stuff. Rotel's solid. So I'm just giving them a hard time because that's what I do. He's leaning towards the new Yamaha CX-A5000, which is the AV processor that I reviewed from Yamaha a little while back. And Steven says it's reasonably affordable in Australia, which means there's nothing reasonably affordable in Australia. It's ridiculously overpriced there. So, but when he compares it to something like the Marantz AV8801, which, by the way, is sexy, as a sexy processor.
Nice processor. Every feature under the sun is thrown into that thing.
Everything. They shoehorned the whole kit and caboodle in there. But it's like, I think it's like $3,000, $2,000 less than the Marantz. So
In Australia, yeah.
in Australia, not here. So that's what he's looking at. Is that part of the question, or is that just a statement?
That's the setup. Yeah.
So that's the setup. All right. Steven has a dual screen set up with a projection screen that can drop down in front of a flat panel. He uses a DVDO Duo video processor. This is an off-board processor. Okay. If you, in your projector, or your display, when you send it the signal, there's a video processor in there. It processes the signal from, just say you give it a 480i signal, you get a 1080p display. It takes that 480i and goes blah, 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 1080p, because it can only display 1080p. That's all it can do. So it's gotta get whatever you give it to 1080p. Okay. Now, if you have a converting or upscaling DVD player or Blu-ray player, you can set that to output 1080p, and it'll go blah, 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 1080p, and it goes straight to the TV, and the TV goes, hey, look, 1080p, I'm doing the thing. Boom, and puts it up there. Okay, this is a box that he bought separate that goes between his sources, or source, I don't know, and his display, or in this case, displays, plural, and will do all that video processing. So his sources can send out whatever it has in its raw form. So if it's a Blu-ray, it can send out raw 1080p, which is what it's got. If it's a DVD player, is it 480p is what those
480i actually is what's on the actual discs. It is, yeah.
Yeah, so you send that 480i out so that you've got the external. I haven't thought about a DVD resolution in so long. I cannot believe I forgot that. Anyway, this external processor does all the work. That way, none of your devices can make any mistakes. So your sources are going, I'm just putting out what's on this disk. I don't have to think about nothing. Your display is saying to it, I don't have to do anything to the signal. It's in the exact right format. I just have to display it. And believe me, even the crappiest display on the planet, and there are quite a few, can usually look pretty dang good if you have an outboard processor like this, or a really good processor in your receiver or in your source. That said, so he's using this. Okay, so it's dual screen setup with a projection screen that can drop down in front of a flat panel. He uses a DVDO Duo video processor to switch between HDMI devices. It feeds both displays and can also calibrate both displays. Yay! His wife and kids like to be able to watch TV without turning on full surround setup. So when Steven upgrades his AV processor with the HDMI switching, how should he go about connecting these things? Well, most of the time, I would say, because I think this one probably has I think that processor probably has dual HDMI outputs, I would imagine, at this level, without looking it up, because can't be bothered. That you could just forego the DVD Duo and just have your, there's probably processing that can be done at the receiver level, which is almost certainly going to be really good, depending on which one he goes with. Because I know the Yamaha does some video processing. You can do some calibration there, or you can do some calibration at you can just calibrate your own displays yourself. But I talked about with Rob beforehand, and Rob thinks that he should keep the DVD-O, which is why?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, the DVD-O is already there, set up, calibrated for the displays, so why toss it out if you're going to have to redo all of that? But more than that, the DVD-O is capable of more calibration settings than you'll find in almost any AV receiver or processor that might go in between, and in fact more than the calibration capabilities of most displays themselves, even inside the service menu or the locked calibration menu that only a calibrator can get into. There's a thing called lookup table, which is basically just a program where it says, okay, here is the color I am sending in the signal, and here is the color that the display ends up showing when it gets that signal. And it's not always 100% accurate, and you can't always make it 100% accurate just using the calibration controls that are in the display itself. But this DVD-O video processor has a more advanced way of adjusting the color so that it says, okay, here's the signal that it came in, here's what the display ends up showing based on the signal. What do I have to do? I build this table that says, if this signal comes in, here's the signal I'm actually going to send out, so that the display shows the correct color rather than the inaccurate color it wants to show natively on its own, using its own processing. So because of all of that, I think it's best to just keep the video processor in the signal chain. And for Steven's setup, this can be pretty simple. First of all, he can leave it exactly the way that he has it. So all of his HDMI devices continue to be plugged directly into the DVD-O. It continues to output its pre-calibrated output. But now the DVD-O can send one or both of its HDMI outputs, you really only need one, to be sent into the new processor, the new Yamaha if he gets that, or the new Marantz or Onkyo or Integra, whatever he ends up with. So he'll only have one HDMI input going into his processor. So the cool thing there is now any of these high-level processors, they can split that one input, so they can have two outputs. They'll be identical. The Yamaha calls theirs Zone 4, but it's still there. It's still a second output.
So stupid.
So that has simplified that side. And for his wife and kids who want to be able to just turn on the TV and listen through the TV speakers and not have to power up the new processor and the full surround sound system, all of these high-level processors from Yamaha, Integra, Marantz have HDMI pass-through, which allows you to say, this HDMI input, even when the processor is in standby, even when it's powered down and it's not actively powering the speakers, whatever is coming in through HDMI input 1, just keep passing it along. Don't do anything to it. And you can do that pretty easily inside the menus. So that's easiest setup for Steven. Just keep everything connected to the DVD, one input. There it is.
So all your sources would go into the DVD. The DVD would just you put the outputs into, or puts. I don't know exactly if he needs to have a separate cable for each of the two displays.
He might, just because the flat panel has a different calibration.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So now, the only problem I might see is if the DVD does not pass audio along with the video.
Oh, it does. It does.
That would be the only thing that would concern me. But yeah, basically you set it up exactly the way it is, except now you're putting your receiver in between, because before you weren't doing that. It's still going to simplify your setup. You're going to get rid of all of those audio cables. You're just going to be right down to DVD, HDMI. So there you go. His second question is, he also has dual SVS SB13 Plus subwoofers, and he says, to correct me or to inform me and to inform all of us, that SVS has several resellers in Australia. I did not know that. I live there. I did not know that.
It's good news.
That's good news. You should look that. They must be crazy expensive though. He uses the Velodyne SMS1, which is a manual EQ that you can get. It's got a pretty rough EQ on it. It's a 1/3 octave smooth, but we'll get into that again. And he likes to be able to create a house curve for the bass in his room, which I think is perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. So again, once he has a new AV processor, which will include some sort of automatic EQ, how should he connect his subwoofers? Now, this one's actually pretty easy as well. I don't know, maybe it's not easy because the SMS1 can it's finicky to connect. It's like you have to put like loops in it. You know, it's kind of odd. But anyways, there's multiple subwoofer inputs on SMS1. I know that there's multiple outputs as well. So you can use that. Just hook it up like you had been before, okay, with your AV receiver with the Rotel processor. But what you're going to do is, before you do your SMS, before you do your manual EQ, you're going to set that bad boy to flat, okay? Just X out everything that was in there. Or maybe you don't, but put it on the flat one, you know, so that you have a flat setting. Then you're going to run your Odyssey or your YPOW or whatever it is that you end up with, and you're going to let it do its thing, okay? Then you're going to go back to your SMS, and you're going to take your measurement there and manually tweak it to your heart's content, and then you can have, I think there's like 6 or 8 different settings you can, or presets that you can have in there, so you can actually set it like, oh, this is for movies, and this is for, you know, movies with not enough bass. This is with movies with lots of bass, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, for anyone who's using any sort of outboard EQ for their subwoofer, that could be the mini DSP that we've mentioned a bunch of times, or one of the Behringer feedback destroyers, or any of those. The signal path is just, you have your AV processor or your AV receiver. It has its subwoofer or dual or even quad subwoofer outputs. You're just going to plug those outputs into this outboard box, the SMS1, the mini DSP, the Behringer feedback destroyer, any of those, and then it goes from that outboard box to your subwoofer. And yeah, you're just going to go ahead, run the auto setup first, let it do its thing, and then you can use the outboard box because it's in between the processor and the sub, so you can use that outboard box to tune it to your heart's content manually.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to run your, you don't want to get your house curve, or you don't want to run the SMS or your outboard processor before you do Odyssey or before you do anything, because then they're just going to be fighting each other, right? And that's just not what you need. Let the automatic one do its thing, and then you can tweak it with your outboard. All right, that was a cool one. I like that one. All right, Michael. When he heard Alex describe hearing voices coming from his subwoofer, see, we did talk about this last week.
No, that wasn't last week. That was like 3 weeks ago. Alex mentioned that.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right, when Alex heard voices coming from a subwoofer, he checked his own subwoofer and found that he could hear the low end of deep voices coming from his subwoofer. But he had to get up close to his subwoofer to notice it. Is that normal? Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Do we have to explain it? I guess he wants us to probably explain it. We can't just say yes and move on. Like, yes.
Well, maybe so. Maybe mind at ease. But
I've got a 7, 8-year-old. I guess he's 8 now. 8-year-old boy, and every once in a while I'll say, "Do you want something to eat?" Yes. Is it a knuckle sandwich? Because that's the first thing I'm going to give you if you don't tell me what you want to eat right now, punk. Yeah. Okay. So Alex, this is normal. All right. We think of these things, and we're going to come back to this. So we're going to explain it. I'll explain it once, and then we can kind of refer back to it. Rob will go into more detail because Rob. This is not. We think of crossovers as, and believe me, dude. This is the exact same way I thought about them until someone explained it to me. We all think of them this way. It's a crossover. 80 hertz is what's cross. We set the crossover 80 hertz. 80 hertz and up goes to your speakers. 80 hertz and down goes to your subwoofer. That's called a brick wall. That does not exist. Okay, that is not how this works. Okay, if you look at how a crossover works, the speakers at or a little bit before 80 hertz start to roll off. Okay, they start to roll off. That's frequency response. They lower the volume of those lower frequencies at a set curve. Okay, and there's 2 or 3 different curves that are standard that they use. You can usually find that in the specifications, and if not, you can always ask the company of your processor, whatever the processor, the AV receiver that you're using will usually tell you which one they're using. They set the crossover on that so that it rolls off. It's not a brick wall. You don't just go 80 hertz and up, then if it's 79, that comes directly from the subwoofer. No. At 80 hertz, there's information coming into both. You're going to hear stuff coming from the subwoofer. You're going to hear stuff coming from the speakers at 80 hertz. You're like, that's not right. Yes, it is. It's exactly the way it's supposed to work. Now, the subwoofer crossover, it goes the other direction. As it's coming up towards 80 hertz, it starts to roll off as it gets higher than 80 hertz. This is so we have a nice, smooth, clean transition from subwoofer to speaker. All right? If it was a brick wall, you would notice it. For sure, you would notice it. You would go, what did just happen with that sound? That was weird. As it went down. As something, if you put a bass run or something, and then it would switch to your subwoofer, you go, wow, that was weird. And that's the way it would sound. And you don't want to hear that. You want it to be nice and smooth. So the crossovers cross over each other. The frequencies cross over each other. So for a while, you're hearing much at the top end of the range. You're hearing much more from the speakers than you are from the sub. And as it gets closer to that 80 hertz, if that's what you have it set at, you're starting to hear about as much from both, technically. And then as you're getting farther lower than that, you're starting to hear more of the sub and less of the speakers until pretty soon you're just hearing just the sub. So Rob, get technical, man. Do your thing.
This will probably be coming up more when we get to Dan's question, because that's a very similar situation. But exactly as Tom is saying, the speakers. The whole idea is the speakers are supposed to be a nice, flat, linear line from 20,000 hertz down to whatever frequency you have selected as your crossover frequency to your subwoofers. So in this example, we're saying that might be 80 hertz. So when Tom's saying that it starts to roll off as it approaches 80 hertz, coming down from 20,000 hertz, it's getting close to 80 hertz, and it starts to roll off. That just means it's getting quieter and quieter. It's gradually getting quieter and quieter. But down at, let's say, 40 hertz, the speaker is still making some sound. It's a lot quieter than it was at 80 hertz and everywhere above 80 hertz, but it's still making some sound. And same for the subwoofer in the opposite direction. It's supposed to be nice and flat from below 20 hertz. It's coming up flat line, getting close to 80 hertz, and it starts to gradually get quieter and quieter as it goes higher. Let's say up at 160 hertz, it's still making sound. And the deep part of deep bass or baritone voices will have some sound down there in that 160 hertz range. Your subwoofer is still making sound there. It's a lot quieter, which is why Michael had to get physically up close to his subwoofer to actually hear it, but it's absolutely still making sound. It's just a lot quieter than it was at 80 hertz and everywhere below. So there's this gradual getting quieter, and they meet at 80 hertz, and so they're both playing there, and you get that nice seamless transition.
Right. What he said. All right. More subwoofers from Michael. This got him wondering about his crossover setting. His subwoofer has its own crossover knob, like almost every single subwoofer on the planet. Odyssey automatically sets crossover points for his speakers. That's through his receiver. His receiver you can set. In this case, Odyssey will set them, and then you can go back and change them if you want. So you can set your crossover in your receiver, but you can have a crossover knob. And then on top of that, there's a separate LPF or LFE setting, I guess. What is that? I don't even know what that is.
That's what Michael wanted to know. So I'll start with that one.
Yeah, go with
LPF,
that one.
Yeah, LPF in this case stands for low pass filter. So you will see two types of filters. There is a low pass filter and a high pass filter. And the way to remember which one is which is to insert the word can. Right? A low pass filter means low frequencies can pass. So it's allowing low frequencies to pass, and it's rolling off, making the higher frequencies quieter and quieter. A high pass filter means high frequencies can pass. So all the high frequencies go through no problem. As the frequency gets lower and lower, it makes it quieter and quieter. So that's the way to keep it straight in your head. Just insert the word frequencies can. LFE stands for the low frequency effects channel. That is the 0.1 in any 0.1 system, 5.1, 7.1, 11.1, whatever it might be. The 0.1 is its own separate dedicated channel that is just got low frequencies in it. So there is this LPF for LFE. You'll see this in pretty much every AV receiver or processor. And it is its own separate thing. It's separate from all the speaker crossover settings. It's separate from your subwoofer settings. It's its own individual itemized thing in the menu. And it is supposed to be set at 120 hertz. 120 hertz is the standard frequency for the LFE channel. Again, it's allowing everything below 120 hertz to go through completely unchanged, and then above 120 hertz, it's getting quieter and quieter. That is just the standard. So Dolby Digital, Dolby True HD, DTS, DTS HD Master Audio, LPCM, all of them, everything that could be a 5.1 or 7.1 is meant to have that set at 120 hertz. I don't even know why they allow you to change it, to be honest. Like, why? Why give people that option?
I've never adjusted that my entire life. Yeah. I've never adjusted that.
That's the default out of the box. That's where it's supposed to be. That's where everything was mastered at. I don't know why they'd even give you an option, but it's there, so unfortunately people can get confused by it. I don't blame you, but leave it at 120. That's the
put that
default.
120 and leave it there. The other part of his question is about his subwoofer crossover knob. Now, a lot of times, if you're going in through the LFE input, it sort of defeats the crossover knob, ignores it. Because that just assumes that your receiver's got it. Don't assume that that's the case. If you have a default or a defeat setting in your knob, like some of the knobs will have like, you can go all the way to this side and it's defeats the crossover, or there's a switch that defeats it or whatever. You can just do that. If not, turn it up as high as it'll go. Okay, you've set your crossover in your receiver. You do not need to set it on the back of your subwoofer. You need to turn that up as high as possible or put it on some sort of defeat mode so it defeats the subwoofer crossover, because what you don't want is you don't want your subwoofer to, on top of the changes in loudness that you're seeing from the crossover in your receiver, you don't want your subwoofer to start lowering the volume as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because then your subwoofer will be artificially low, and no one wants that. We did not buy subwoofers, say it with me, we did not buy subwoofers to not hear them. I am sorry, people who live nearby. We bought subwoofers so that we could hear them. So we do not want what we call cascading crossovers. Cascading crossovers, when you have two crossovers doing the same thing at the same time, and just makes a mess of the whole 9 yards. Too many cooks in the kitchen on that one. Anything to add to that?
Just a couple of things that this will lead into Dan's question as well. Yeah. So there might be some technical stuff that can be a little bit confusing, because you might see these things called the slope of the low-pass filter, or the slope of the high-pass filter, or the slope of the crossover. And you'll see them listed as things like 12 dB, 12 decibels per octave, or 24 dB, 24 decibels per octave, or you might see them called something like second order or fourth order. Second order is the same thing as 12 decibels per octave. Fourth order is the same thing as 24 decibels per octave, and you would have the multiples in between there too for a third order or a first order. A first order would be a 6 decibel per octave. So what does that mean, decibels per octave? An octave is literally a doubling of frequency. So from 40 hertz to 80 hertz is double 40 hertz, that is 1 octave. From 1,000 hertz to 2,000 hertz, right? There's many more frequencies between 1,000 and 2,000 than there are from 40 to 80, but 2,000 is still double 1,000, so that is an octave. 4,000 to 8,000 is an octave, so it's a doubling of frequency. That is the definition of an octave. So when they're saying that the filter has a slope of 12 decibels per octave, it means every time you double the frequency or halve the frequency, depending on which direction the filter is going, it's getting 12 decibels quieter by the time it reaches that octave. So let's say you have the low pass filter on your subwoofer. So low frequencies can pass. So everything below where you set that frequency, the low pass filter frequency or the crossover frequency, is going through flat, and then let's say it's 80 hertz that you've chosen, it starts to get quieter and quieter. How much quieter and quieter? Well, if it's 12 decibels per octave, it means up at 160 hertz, twice 80 hertz, that's 1 octave. Up at 160 hertz, it'll be 12 decibels quieter. Or if it's a 24 decibels per octave slope, it means up at 160 hertz, it'll be 24 decibels quieter. Now, it's not a linear straight line. It's a curve that's going down. It's a logarithmic curve if you want to know the exact shape of it. But it just means that you double the frequency. If it's a low-pass filter, it'll be whatever the number is in decibels, that much quieter. Or if it's a high-pass filter for your speakers, you have it, so it's coming down to 80. Let's say it's 12 decibels per octave, high-pass filter for your speakers, and you set that to 80 hertz. Down at 40 hertz, half of 80 hertz, 1 octave down, it will be 12 decibels quieter, or 24 if that's the number. Second order is 12 decibels. Fourth order is 24 decibels. So just to explain what those things might be, because you'll see them. You'll see them in specs and stuff like that.
And just don't touch them. That's what I say. Honestly, there's no reason that you need to mess with that. You know, that's for high-end tweaking, and I mean high-end not in, like, you have to have really expensive speakers. I mean, like, that's for people who really want to get in there and just do every little bit of it. I'm not interested in touching that setting. I do this for a living. So if you need a reason to just walk away from it, then that's what there you go. Now, Dan.
Yes.
We're continuing our topic of crossovers. This is Subwoofer Crossover.
It's crossover week.
Well. It is crossover week. It's like Shark Week, but I guess it depends on your. I would have to say Shark Week has got to be a little bit more exciting than crossover week, no matter who you are. There may be a couple people out there like, sharks. Let's talk about some crossovers. All right. Dan took our advice and started using some bass sweeps from AudioCheck.net to set up his SVS Ultra bookshelf speakers. I wonder how he likes those. I think he loves them. SVS SB12 NSD subwoofer and Emotiva, so many letters, XSP1 preamp. He was eager to start using his Emotiva preamp's high-pass and low-pass filters. We just talked about them.
I did.
And to set up an 80 hertz crossover between the speakers and the subwoofer, since the NAD integrated amp he replaced did not have any of these settings. Since he's never used the bass sweep and set up a crossover before, though, he's really unsure if what he's hearing is correct. He was more or less expecting silence from his speakers below 80 hertz and silence from his subwoofer from above 80 hertz. But instead, the full bass sweep is audible. It's just the volume changes. Is he doing something wrong? Dan, you know the answer to your question, don't you? Not a brick wall, dude. It's not a brick wall. But you know what? You were absolutely in the right to think that that's the way it would work, 'cause it sounds like that's the way it would work. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah, if you
absolutely.
think it's a handoff, right? I hand it off from the speakers to the subwoofer, right? That
Yep.
totally makes sense, intuitively to think of it that way. But
Yep.
nope, it's a slope. It's a slope on either end. The speakers are getting gradually quieter and quieter on the low end, and the subwoofer is getting gradually quieter and quieter on the high end. And in between, at 80 hertz, they meet and cross over.
So Dan, you're doing nothing wrong, and what you're hearing is correct. Your ears work, and it sounds like your processors are working too. So there you go.
Yes, however, I
Uh-oh.
have to mention this crazy XSP1 thing from Emotiva. It is now the XSP1 Generation 2. I don't know why they couldn't call it the XSP2, but no, it's still the XSP1 Generation 2 in the current lineup. They have the craziest crossover setup thing I've ever seen in my life, because there's nothing in the menus. You can't go into the user menu and adjust the crossover frequency. You can't even set it as a crossover. You have to do it separately for the speakers and the subwoofer. And the way you do it is by using a tiny little screwdriver to access a screw on the back of the XSP1 processor. If you turn it all the way to the left, that'll be set it at 50 hertz. If you turn it all the way to the right, it'll set it to 250 hertz.
I remember
and there's
that.
8 little things in between.
Oh my God, I remember that. When they came out with this, I remember
Yeah.
looking at going, that is stupid. I mean, it's just so weird that it is that way. But hey, it's just for they just made it more difficult than it needs to be. But it's definitely
Yeah.
for people who want to have absolute control. But I don't know why they thought that was necessary. I guess the main outputs. Oh no.
Well,
So
I mean,
this-
it's because everything in the XSP1 is all analog.
Yeah.
There are no digital controls, so doing things inside of a user menu would require some sort of digital control. That's the only
Yeah.
way you can really do it with a user menu interface. So using a screw, I don't know why they couldn't have put a knob on it for you, though, or put it on the front of the thing instead of on the
This
back.
is the same
where you
people
have
that
to
made
use
the
a
Stealth
screwdriver.
BC1, right? Where if you want to take off the 2 dB bump they put at the bottom end, you had to take the top off of it and use tweezers to get to the little jumper and move the jumper around.
Yeah.
I'm like, somebody over there is just, and I think people really kind of like that because it seems very industrial, and you know what I mean, it seems like sort of hardcore.
Mhm.
But I don't need to be. I don't need my gear to tell me I'm hardcore, dude. I already know I'm hardcore. I'm not as hardcore as you, but I'm hardcore enough, and I'll take me a knob. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah, so for Dan specifically, or for anyone else who's facing something with weird controls like this, we just mentioned that almost always, with every normal processor or receiver, you would want to turn off or defeat the crossover that's built into your subwoofer, right? It has a crossover knob on the back of your subwoofer, and almost always you want to just turn that off or defeat it, or if you can't do those things, turn the knob as high as it will go so that the subwoofer itself is not applying any sort of low-pass filter. In this one situation where you have weird controls like this, I am very tempted to say, because you can just turn off these filters on the Emotiva, the low-pass filter for the subwoofer output, I am very tempted to say just turn that off on the Emotiva and use the actual crossover knob on your subwoofer, because that is going to be so much easier to adjust than this stupid little screw with a
Well, you still
screwdriver on
have
the
to-
back
you
of the
have-
thing.
You still have to have the high pass filter. So
But
if
you still need the high-pass filter, yeah.
But the thing is that they don't even have numbers on it. They just have little dots.
Exactly.
You can count the dots.
That's why I'm suggesting to do it this way, because you're never going to get them to exactly the same crossover frequency. You're using a screwdriver with no real knowledge of what frequency you're setting it to. So my suggestion in a weird situation like this is begin with just your speakers connected, have them set to full range, and play that bass sweep that I've mentioned, one that's marked so it actually gives you a little click every 10 hertz as it sweeps its way down, and just sort of figure out how low your speakers can play before you start to get any sort of wonkiness in your bass. And by wonkiness, I just mean the sweep is supposed to sound the exact same volume from top to bottom. That would be the ideal. But because your speakers can't necessarily keep playing perfectly flat, and mostly because your room will not allow them to sound flat at your seat, play that bass sweep, figure out how low your speakers can go before they get quieter or louder or just uneven from seat to seat, and then go ahead and adjust that sillily controlled high-pass filter on your Emotiva until it just plays nice and flat down and then gradually starts to roll itself off. So this is a weird setup for the crossover. I'm sorry about that, Dan, that we have to sort of make it sound a little bit more confusing than what we just said, but same idea. You're still just
if you count the little
filters.
dots, it's not equal, I don't think. I don't think
I
you can
know.
break it down equally. Because it goes from 50 to 250, it looks like, at least on this picture, that's what it looks
Yep.
like. And it doesn't go equally in there. Anyway, so yeah, you have to play with it. The other option is you can set them all to full range, have your main outputs go through your subwoofer, and let the subwoofer do the crossing over. If you have outputs...
And if those outputs are filtered, which, as we mentioned last week, a lot of times the output on your subwoofer is just connected by a wire inside. There's no actual filters going there. So the SB12 NSD that Dan has, as far as I know, I don't think it even has outputs to go to your speakers.
But let's just pretend that they did. It could be that if you might be able to use the subwoofer crossover for the whole thing. You'd set the output from your processor to your subwoofer, use the subwoofer's crossover. The crossover, if it says, if the subwoofer sends out filtered outputs, you would then send that to your amp, which we would then send to your speaker.
Yeah. Be careful. Read your subwoofer's manual, because if that is a feature of it where the outputs on the subwoofer are actually filtered, that will be mentioned in the manual because it's a little unusual. So, yeah, I'm reticent to actually give that advice, but
I know.
Read the manual, make double sure. Yeah.
Read the manual, but in this case, yeah, you're going to have to play with one of those two knobs. The other thing, basically, what you're going to end up having to do is with the high pass filter for the speakers. You could actually just adjust the other knob so it was the exact same spot theoretically, and hope that they were, because that's basically what you want. But I don't know. What's it, Kevin? Was wondering if okay, so last week we talked about Steve and he had a 70 hertz null problem that we talked about. We thought it was the riser. Okay, that's the thing he put his chairs on. He built it off the ground in his room, and he's got this weird 70 hertz null. We think that riser is vibrating and causing sound issues in his room. Okay, Kevin thought that it might be due to phase and sound wave cancellation issues between Steve's speakers and his dual subwoofers, and what we thought of that. I thought that was a very good suggestion, and very astute, Kevin. That was a very astute suggestion, Kevin, because this can be an issue, and one that we don't often bring up because I don't like to tell people to play with phase because it's often really hard to tell if you're making a good difference, and most subwoofers, especially budget ones, only have a switch. It may only be a 0 or 180, which is practically useless. And the ones that are like 0, 90, 180, 270 are basically useless as well. So what you really want is a phase knob. Now, we've talked about phase when we talked about surround speakers, those dipole-bipole speakers in particular, and the way that phase works if you think of it within a speaker, is if you have two drivers and when one goes in, the other one goes in, and when the one goes out, the other one goes out. They are going in phase. They are firing in phase. They are moving in phase. Once one driver starts moving differently at different times, slightly different times than the other, they are out of phase. Okay? Could it be that Steve's 70 hertz null problem is because his speakers and his subwoofers are not, all those sounds aren't leaving the speakers at the same time, or aren't arriving at your ear at the same time? We think no. And it's for the reasons that Rob said last week. It's because the problem, if that were the case, it would be one of the measurements of his room would have clued us into that. And we don't really see that as being an issue. But that said, if you are having weird, playing with phase is one way to sort of address these. Can sometimes address room problems by taking your subwoofer and adjusting the phase. You need a knob. Yeah. Honestly, you need somebody to do it while you're listening, which is a pain. Not fun for the person who's adjusting the knob, and certainly not a lot of fun to listen to. So you better buy somebody some beer or some jewelry or something, or whatever you're going to need to get that done. What do you think?
Yeah, Kevin's suggestion here is good because phase cancellation problems are a very real thing, and in situations like this where you're getting a null, that can often be the cause. The reason we don't think it's the cause in Steve's particular case is because he's getting this 70 hertz null at both rows of seats,
Right,
and pretty much at every seat in both rows. So that doesn't mathematically make any sense if it were a phase cancellation issue. If it were a phase cancellation issue, that might be the case in one seat, but it shouldn't be the case in the seat next to it or in the row behind it. It should be different at every seat. You should be getting a different response. In fact, we would expect that at one of the seats there would be a big 70 hertz hump if it were a phase issue. So that's why we're thinking this riser is actually creating like a vertical null. It's creating a null between the ceiling and the floor. So that it's affecting all the rows and all the seats. Because
we may never hear from Steve of whether or not that's the case. He may just say, "I am never listening to that podcast again. Those two are jerks."
And it still might be a measurement error. There's also that possibility. We haven't heard back. So.
I mean, basically, with a phase knob, if you have a phase knob, what you can do is you can move those nulls and those humps around your room. I mean, in essence, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And Kevin's second question speaks to this. He says, speaking of phase, does an adjustable phase knob, which I'm just talking about, as opposed to just a switch, which are useless, essentially do the same thing as a distance delay or distance/delay setting in your AV receiver speaker setup menu? So if you've got, almost every AV receiver does this, you can set the distance from from each of your speakers to where you sit. Your auto room setup will do it for you. It used to be that they were terrible with subs. These days they've gotten it kind of better. It used to be that every sub. I remember the first time I used a room setup system. I don't remember if it was from Denon or Pioneer, but whoever it was, that my sub was 32 feet away. I'm like, it's like in the street. It's like, that's how far away it was. But Kevin's question is, speaking of phase, does an adjustable phase knob, is it the same thing as playing with the distance? And it is exactly the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. Rob's dying to say something. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, in regards to the auto setup, potentially setting the distance for your subwoofer channel at some outlandish-looking figure. Yeah, this is a bit of a tricky thing. First of all, like Tom says, in all the recent ones I've seen, and all of them, Odyssey, YPOW, MCACC, Anthem Arc, all of them, they seem to do a pretty darn good job of setting the distances for your speakers. You know, if they're off by like 0.1 of a foot or something like that. Like they're pretty darn accurate. They're really good at that. The subwoofer channel is a really weird thing because we're dealing with bass sound waves where the wavelength of the frequencies that you're playing might actually be physically longer than your room. And so we're also dealing with sound. Sound waves travel at about 1,300 feet per second, right? So we're dealing with a situation where with bass sound waves, we're never actually getting one full cycle of the wave even forming in the distance between the subwoofer and the microphone. The sound wave itself is longer than the distance from the subwoofer to the microphone. So what the microphone is actually picking up is reflections. It's picking up the reflected sound waves that have traveled past the microphone, bounced off a wall somewhere, and come back to the microphone before it can even pick up that a full cycle of that particular frequency has happened. And that's why it will set the distance to some weird figure. It might set it to 27 or 32 feet or something like that, and the sub's only 8 feet away. The thing is, in terms of phase, in terms of getting it time aligned so that sound waves are reaching your seat in synchronicity, so that, you know, if a sound wave is coming from the speaker and it's coming from the subwoofer and they both leave at the same time, they're supposed to arrive at your seat at the same time. And depending on how physically close they are, you might have to delay the release of one of those sound waves so that they'll both arrive at your seat at the same time. when you're dealing with bass sound waves, you're almost never, well, I can pretty much say you're never in a real room hearing the direct sound. You're not hearing the sound that came directly from the subwoofer and went straight to your seat. You're hearing a sound that went past you, bounced off one or two walls, and came back. So when it sets those weird distances, it's not actually wrong. It's actually kind of saying that's how much delay we have to apply so that the bass sound wave seems to, perceptually, reaches your ear at the same time as a higher frequency. So I would actually leave that alone. I wouldn't go setting it to the actual physical distance because it's not right. That's not actually what you're hearing. Tom?
I'd change it. I wouldn't have. So
that's good. We finally disagree on something.
You're welcome to. I see what you're saying. I can't believe that's not going to end up causing you issues in the long run, especially when you have frequencies that are close to that crossover point. So that said, you can, if you do not have a phase knob, you can use the distance settings in your. Oh God, talk about a marathon session of trying to do listening tests in your room. This would be you changing your distance settings to see if you can use the phase to adjust where you're. Just get another sub. It's totally going to be worth it. Does he have another question in here? Yes, he does.
Yes, there is one.
Last one from Kevin. When using two subwoofers today, both need to be individually in time with each other at the listening position as well as in time with the speakers. No. I mean, technically, most of the time you're playing your subs in mono, okay? Yes. Unless you have a very high-end receiver.
And even then, I would recommend playing them in mono.
Rob is all about the mono. There's many jokes there, but I'm going to leave that alone. So they are not going to be hitting your ear or the other speakers. They're certainly not going to be hit, especially if you have one in the front of the room and one in the back of the room. They're certainly not going to be in phase or in time with your speakers, and they're unlikely to be equidistant from you and each other. So they're not going to be in time with each other either. So no, they don't need to be because they're not going to be. I mean, it's just the way it works.
Yeah, once again, deep bass is a different beast than higher frequencies. You have to think of it in terms of the wavelength. You have to think of it in terms of how physically long the sound wave is, because as soon as the sound wave is physically longer than any dimension in your room or the physical distance from the subwoofer to your listening position, worrying about timing and phase is sort of pointless, other than wanting to make sure that you have as even and uniform a set of little peaks and dips and no huge, gigantic peaks or nulls in your room. All of that is due to reflected sound. Again, when you're hearing deep bass, you're only ever hearing reflected sound. You are never hearing direct sound the way you are the high frequencies coming from your speakers. So what you want when you have two subwoofers is you want them both to be moving out and in at exactly the same time. You want them to be perfectly in phase with one another. You don't want to have different phases relative to one another, other than the case where having them both perfectly in phase is causing a problem at your seat because it happens to create a big peak or a big null at a certain frequency when they're perfectly in phase. Unfortunately, it's purely trial and error at that point. This is why positioning, if you can use positioning before trying to solve these problems with adjusting phase, life is so much easier. Because if you can position your subwoofers opposite one another, again, we mentioned this last week, mirror images of one another, so that if you picture the sound waves coming out of both subwoofers and their mirror image, you can just visualize how the sound waves would be as uniform throughout your room as it's possible to get them. If you have both subwoofers up at the front of your room or both at the back or both offset to one side, you can visualize how the sound waves would be denser on that side of the room than they are on the opposite side. And that's when you have to start playing with phase, different phase for the two subwoofers so that by the time it gets to your seat, it's even and uniform again. Oh,
Right.
that's hard stuff. That's trial and
Yeah,
error. I
and
would
basically,
much
like I
rather
said,
use
you
positioning.
can move around these nulls, you can move around these peaks, you can
Yeah.
move these things around with phase, but you're not really getting rid of any of them. Okay, that's really not what you're doing. What you're doing is going, ooh, I got a 50 hertz null right here. This is the guy who paid me to set up this system for him. This is his chair. He's gonna sit here, and eventually something's gonna fly overhead, and it's gonna go. Zzz, you know what I mean? It's going to have this nice little blank spot in the middle of it. He's going to call me up and call me very nasty names. Let me start messing with the phase until that stops happening. Now, you just moved it off of him. You just moved it away from that seat that's still in the room. Okay? So, yes, you can play with phase. Yes, it can make a difference. It's really just it's a band-aid. It's nothing you can do. And believe me, that all the custom installers I've ever talked to about it, they've always said that's the last thing that they do. Like that's like they're like, okay, I've done everything I can do with the measurements and with the placement and with the room corrections and everything. I've everything I can think of, and let's start messing with that phase knob.
Yeah, because it is just trial and error. I mean, yes, if you have a supercomputer and you have fluid dynamic modeling, you could model it.
Ooh, I have that. Oh wait, no, I don't.
But even then, you'd have to program in every surface in your room, all the furniture, exactly all its coefficients of sound absorption and everything, which you don't know. You don't know how sound absorbent your sofa is. I mean, even the fluid dynamic modeling is kind of useless. It's just trial and error, which means it's tedious and takes forever, and that's why it's the last resort.
All right, Josh has got more subwoofers. Josh, he's got several different subwoofers. Well, he just certainly does. He's got a 12-inch Polk, a 12-inch Eminence. I don't know if
it's a do-it-yourself one, as far as I know.
Is it? I haven't heard of that. A sealed sub with 15 and 12-inch drivers. Jesus. Well, why would you want 15 and 12-inch? Is one a passive?
JBL has one of those. JBL has a 12-18. There's a big 18-inch driver and a 12-inch driver in the same enclosure, firing at the same time.
That's crazy.
I don't know, dude.
Whatever. And 10-inch subs built into his front towers. He must have DefTechs. So that's
they're do-it-yourself, those. Yeah.
Are they do-it-yourself as well? All right. So he's got a bunch of subs. I don't consider those 10-inch subs built in the front of his tower subs. I mean, they may play very, very low. To my mind, they're the same as having an actual, just a full-range speaker. But yes, they probably play very, very low. He's playing around with phase and SPL. Oh my God! And finally, the inconsistent results depending on the song. Oh my God! So he's constantly fiddling with the settings. Would like to know if there's a standardized procedure he could. Oh my God, Rob, I'm going to take a break. I'll just come back. You tell me when you're done. Call me on my cell phone when it's over.
Send you a tweet.
Yeah, no. Let me see here. A standardized procedure he could follow for setting up his system. There is a standardized procedure that you can. Now, first of all, stop playing with phase. Let's just go there. All right, put everything in phase. Put everything at 0. To start with. Let's start right there. Then get your SPL all set up. All right? Let's do that. All right? This is going to be my suggestion. This is where I think you're running into problems. What I think running into problems is one of those many subs that you have is, or more, is messing up at some point. And some of them mess up in certain points, and some of them mess up with other certain points. Okay? This is what I think is happening. So you're hearing inconsistent results depending on the song, because different songs excite the problems in different subs.
Yup.
That's what I think is happening. So what you need to do is set each one of your subs up absolutely as perfectly as you can, okay? And then play each one, play a sweep through each one individually and see what is going on. And I bet dollars to donuts, at least one of those subs, and probably 2, is doing something really wrong, like. Really wrong. Like, you're going to go, oh my God, what is that noise? That's how wrong it's going to be. It's not going to be like, I think it might be a little. No, it's going to be wrong. And you're going to go, I'm going to get that guy out of my room. And you're going to stop playing with your phase. And you're going to stop playing with SPL. And you're going to start enjoying your music again. That's what I think is going to end up happening. But that said, take it away, Rob.
Yeah. Here's a perfect example of more subwoofers is not always better, because just a larger number of different subs with different capabilities in different positions, that is not going to lead to nice, smooth, even bass at all of the seats in your room. So,
well, it certainly isn't just by definition. It could,
yeah.
if you had 5 different SVS subs and a couple of JBL JL Audio subs, and then a few I don't know, Rhythmics, or with a couple of big pair, maybe one of those new Martin Logan ones in there. Just throw them on the mix. You could probably just toss over anywhere in the room, and you go, man, this place sounds awesome. But that's a very, very, very rare case. If you've got subs with different capabilities, you can't just throw them in there and hope for the best,
Yeah, it's tempting to think of it that way, but it's not quite the way it works out. So, first of all, I want to nail down something conceptually, because this is something I sort of tout on the forums and whatnot when I answer questions, and it's not something that everybody agrees with, because it's kind of a long process if you want to do it the way I'm suggesting. But conceptually, what are we trying to achieve? And in my opinion, what we're trying to achieve is, if I played a frequency sweep all the way from 20,000 hertz all the way down to 20 hertz, and I played that frequency sweep at 85 decibels, where human hearing is its most linear, if I played that sweep all the way from the very top to the very bottom through just one speaker, not all 5 of my speakers or both the front speakers in a stereo pair, just one speaker at a time, I want that sweep to be the same volume, from the entire top all the way down to the entire bottom. So if we imagine an ideal room with an ideal speaker, that's what we would hear. And it doesn't matter which speaker I played it from, my front left, my center, front right, either of my surrounds. It doesn't matter. I want to be able to play that full sweep from top to bottom and have that sweep sound the exact same volume from top to bottom. Now, we can't have that happen because, one, very, very few speakers could do that on their own. And second, even if they could, your room would not allow it to sound that way. In the bass, it will become uneven. So what are we trying to do? Conceptually, what I think is the best approach is to say, how low can each individual one of my speakers go? How low can it go before it deviates away from that flat linear response? It might get all the way down to 70 hertz, and then there's a big hump from that particular speaker because of the room. Or it gets all the way down to 60 hertz, and then there's a big dip because of the room. Or it goes all the way down to 40 hertz, and then it just gradually gets quieter because the speaker itself just can't keep playing that loud below 40 hertz. Whatever the case might be, I want to discover for each one of my speakers individually how low it can go before it deviates away from that nice, flat, linear response. Now it's up to the job of multiple subwoofers, probably 2 or 4, not 3, because 3 usually gets weird issues. You can visualize what it would be like trying to get even response from 3 subwoofers positioned in your room. It would look really strange. So using 2 or 4 subwoofers and careful placement, you want to be able to get nice, even, uniform distribution of those very long bass sound waves where you're never hearing the direct sound, you're only hearing the reflected sound. And you should be able to achieve that up to above 120 hertz or so. It should be possible, just mathematically speaking, to have 2 subwoofers or 4 subwoofers properly positioned, play that high with very nice, even, uniform response throughout your room. That then allows you to set the crossover between any one speaker and those dual or quad subwoofers wherever you like, so that you get this nice transition and you get that sweep all the way from 20,000 hertz down to 20 hertz that's even and uniform and flat. So that's conceptually the goal. So first thing I would recommend for Josh to do is figure out how low those front towers of his can play on their own. They have 10-inch subs built in, but that doesn't mean they can play right down to below 20 hertz. And even if they could, your room wouldn't allow them to sound that way. So don't think of those 10-inch subs built into your towers as subs. Just think of them as bass drivers. That's what they are. They are bass drivers that are built into your towers. So figure out how low it can go before the bass starts to become uneven in any way, louder, quieter, or just from seat to seat. And then we have to just work on the subwoofers, which is probably going to be two of them, because I don't think that Polk 12-inch is keeping up with the other two, just based on specs. I'm not a huge fan of any of Polk's subwoofers, to be completely honest with you. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that thing is honking out a bunch of 50 and 60 hertz bass. So when those notes play in a song, oh, there goes your Polk, and then everywhere below it, the thing is barely making a sound or it's just distorting, which might be why you're finding it inconsistent from song to song. So use two subwoofers first, see if you can get them placed in your room so that you have nice, even, uniform bass, and then just treat your front towers as towers and cross them over to the dual subs. That would be my recommendation. Are you awake, Tom?
I said the same thing but shorter, I think, basically.
Sure. Repetition helps bring it in.
Repetition. There we go. That was his whole question, right?
It was.
That was. So we're on to Nick, who I said we were probably going to do next week. And I guess that's probably going to be the thing that's going to happen. How long have we
It is a big topic. Yeah.
It is a big topic. Nick has got he's got his screw it. Let's just do it. Nick wants to set up a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio wall-to-wall screen in his approximately 12 by 20 foot room with 2 rows of seats. Okay, 16 by 9 is what you're used to hearing. I hope. You might remember 4 by 3, 4 to 3. That's what your standard TV screens were back when they were stupid and square. And then we went to widescreen, which is 16 by 9. This is 2.35 to 1, which is that the same thing as 21 to 9?
It's actually a little bit wider than 21 by 9. To put it another way, 16 by 9 is 1.78 to 1. So it's the ratio. Yeah, well, it's the ratio of how wide is the screen versus how high is the screen. So if the height of the screen is a unit of 1, then a 16 by 9 aspect ratio screen, your standard HD TV, is 1.78 times as wide as it is high. So Nick is talking about having a screen that is 2.35 times as wide as it is high. So it is wider than a standard HD TV.
Right, and this would be consistent with the those really super wide format movies, a little more cinematic ones. I don't know. The IMAX stuff isn't the IMAX stuff 2.35 to 1. It's pretty close to that.
Real IMAX is actually 4 by 3.
Oh,
that's real IMAX is almost a square. And then
the 16. Oh, that's right. It's 16 by 9. Like I was thinking of The Dark Knight, right? The Dark Knight. The IMAX scenes are 16 by 9. Everything else is 2.35. All right. Yeah. So, anyways, he likes video. He's more of a videophile than he is an audiophile, which, whatever. As long as you have subwoofers, you and I can still be friends. So he wants to know how to go about. He's more into obviously he's more into video. How should he go about setting up his screen? Now he's got a 12-foot wide by 20-foot long room. Okay, he wants 2 rows of seats and he wants a big old screen, which is cool. That 2.35. He says wall-to-wall screen. He's full on going to fill the front of his room with screen. Okay, that's what he wants. He wants that fully cinematic experience. So he wants 12 feet long. 12 feet is the 2.35, and the 1 is whatever the 1 is when you got 12 feet. Is basically what he wants at the front of his room. So how should he go about setting up his screen? He's open to using an acoustically transparent screen, but he's noticed a crosshatch pattern when bright images are projected onto the perforated screens when used in full-size movie theaters. That guy sits close. Do the woven screens available for home use have the same problem? What sort of speakers do we recommend? And he'd like to use dual subwoofers, but the midpoint on each side wall won't physically fit well. If he uses a midpoint on the subwoofers on each corner, but then you have to use less expensive subwoofers that fit. He could do 4 subwoofers, I'm sorry, 1 in each corner, but then he'd have to use less expensive subwoofers that fit within his budget. So what do we suggest for all this? Okay, now, let me just say, I am all for acoustically transparent screens in this case. I am also, and I'm going to disagree with Rob because we talked about it beforehand, I am for a fixed screen in this case. Okay, you should get the biggest screen that you can get, and you should mount it very, very close to your wall, just barely off your wall, so that it's a fixed screen. It's up there. It's huge. It's massive. It doesn't move. It's on the wall. Okay. It's also acoustically transparent. I would then be looking at very thin or very small in walls, or I mean, very thin or very small on walls, or preferably in this case, I think in walls. 3 front matched ones right across the front, right at ear level, behind that screen, perfectly level, perfectly sonically matched. That's what I would be going with. I'd be doing the same speaker for your surrounds and your same speakers for your surround backs. That's what I would do if I were in his case. This way, you get it's the cheapest by far, because if you do a drop screen, the minute you get into these drop screens, they get a lot more expensive. The ones that there's quite a few screens out there that are fixed that you can use, like these panels to do side masking. And they just magnet up there, you just snap them up there, so that when you're not viewing a 2.35 to 1 image, you can put your masking up there, and there's less bleed, and it's cheap. It's a lot cheaper than those motorized systems are insanely expensive. And if you're a videophile, you gotta have masking, dude. You gotta be down with that. And then the end walls will make it so that you can get as far away from that screen as possible, allowing you to have the biggest screen that you can possibly get, and for the least amount of money. And then you can get your chairs a little bit further into the room so that you're not so far there. And then you're also, because it's acoustically transparent and your speakers are behind there, you won't have to worry so much about where you're placing your speakers. So that's my suggestion for at least the speakers. I don't know what the sorts of speakers, where he should put it, and the acoustically transparent. Oh, and then he wants to talk about crosshatch, but we'll do that later. What's your recommendation for his room setup?
Okay, so I think a lot about home theater, as you might imagine. No. And liar. So there's a few things. I know there are the people who love having the 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio screens. I don't blame you. It looks really cool. I have a little bit of an issue with the fact that I like everything to be shown, if possible, at the size it's supposed to be shown. So, if you're watching regular HD TV, just regular TV programs in a 16:9 aspect ratio, those should be up at the front of your room in whatever size you find comfortable. I happen to like a 32-degree field of view. Some people like a bigger image, so maybe it's a 40-degree field of view or something like that. Now, when you're watching a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio movie, this wider CinemaScope aspect ratio, the height of the screen is supposed to remain the same, and it's just supposed to get wider. Now, that is not the way those movies show up on your regular HD TV. On your regular HD TV, they end up putting black bars on the top and the bottom of the screen, and the image is actually smaller than the HDTV regular 16:9 content. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be just as tall and actually wider. So, like Tom was saying, the 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio screen with masking for when you want to watch 16:9 content, that makes perfect sense. Now, there are some really expensive motorized masking systems.
They're crazy expensive.
They're very expensive.
They're just insane.
Especially ones that are acoustically transparent.
Oh my God.
What you might have is a situation where if you're doing this wall-to-wall screen, it means your front left and right speakers, your main speakers, are also going to be behind that screen, and they might be right behind where that masking is going to happen to go. So the masking would also have to be acoustically transparent. Otherwise, you'd be blocking the sound from your front, left, and right speakers anytime you try to play them. So here's the one issue I have with the 2.35 to 1 screen. I'm crazy enough that I care about some of the movies like The Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises, Mission Impossible, Tron, movies that were shot partially in 2.35 to 1 and partially in IMAX. Because IMAX is supposed to be even bigger. When it's playing the 16:9 content, that is the full IMAX view in those portions of those movies, it's supposed to be just as wide as your 2.35 to 1 screen, but now even taller. It's supposed to be huge. So, I don't know. Most people probably don't care about that. It's probably not a big deal. It's a
I, I,
handful of movies.
I was going to say it's only a couple of movies, dude. He may be a video file. That's hardcore,
Yeah.
even for video files.
But what will happen is if you're watching The Dark Knight on Blu-ray and you're using a 2.35 to 1 screen and you have filled that entire screen width-wise, it's fine for the 2.35 to 1 portions. When the IMAX portions of that movie come on, all of a sudden there will be parts of the images being projected above and below your physical screen, which is a little bit weird. Now, if you really want to still use the 2.35 to 1 screen, you can do a video processor, like the DVDO processors that we mentioned. And some of those advanced ones actually have a feature right in there that makes sure that you never actually project above and below your screen. It will squish the image down so that it will still fit. So if you want to get really technical about it, there are those things out there. So that's one way. Another thing is subtitles. If you're watching a movie with subtitles, often the subtitles will be in the black bar portion. They'll be physically below your screen, which means they won't show up. However, the Oppo Blu-ray players, for example, can actually move the position of the subtitles, assuming they're the overlay type that's programmed in Java. So they can actually move it so that it will be inside your screen. So there are ways around it, so I'm not hugely opposed. But if you don't want to do the acoustically transparent version and you don't want to do the fixed screen or you don't want to deal with the masking, there is a great offering from Elite Screens. They're a maker of screens which are quite affordable. But it's talking relative terms, but compared to some of the other ones out there, relatively affordable. They're one of the less expensive options. They actually have a screen called the Osprey, which is 2 screens. It's 2 screens in one case. It is a 16:9 screen and a 2.35 to 1 screen. They're both motorized, so they drop down independently, and the 2.35 to 1 screen is the same height as the 16:9 screen, but wider. It's exactly what I talked about. So that's a cool way of not having to deal with masking. And if you don't care that much about audio, if you're willing to have your speakers, your front speakers pushed quite far to the sides of your room, you don't even have to go acoustically transparent. You could mount it high enough that your center speaker could be below the screens when they come down, and you could have your front speakers on the outside of the screen. You wouldn't quite have your wall-to-wall screen that you're talking about. But that is another way if you want to go fancy with it that way. So the other thing we haven't talked about at all is anamorphic lenses.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole 2.35 to 1 thing, and it needs to be addressed. Yeah, well, dude.
I know. It's
part
my
of the
fault.
answer.
All right. So anamorphic lenses. The idea behind this is when you're projecting a black bar, you are losing some of your pixels. Okay, you're losing some of your light, you're losing some of your pixels, you're losing some of your resolution. So if you're going to project a black bar, you're wasting part of your resolution from your projector. Okay, so if you can set your projector to something like a full setting, okay.
Well, it has to actually be an anamorphic setting, and a lot of projectors have that built in. They will actually have an anamorphic mode that you can set them to. So
yeah, so what this does is it uses all the pixels all the time. So if you were just to view it on the wall that way, it would be everybody would be squished, right? They'd be squished and tall.
yeah, it would stretch them vertically, so everyone would look tall and skinny because it's taken the image that should be 2.35 to 1 with black bars above and below. That's what's actually on the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray has those black bars programmed right into it. The anamorphic mode will stretch that thing vertically so that it fills up the entire frame, but now everybody looks tall and skinny.
Then it slides a lens in front of that with the lens itself. It stretches that back out to 2.35 to 1 so that all that light, all that resolution is being used. It's all distorted when it's coming directly out of the projector, but then the lens goes in front of the projector and then makes it the correct aspect ratio and it looks perfect to you. And that's the way that anamorphic lenses work. If you're really a videophile, Nick, this I assume you have this. If you're already thinking about 2.35 to 1, you gotta be thinking about. If you don't have this and you're going to go 2.35 to 1, you need to rethink going 2.35 to 1. Just stick
Well,
with 16. But I'm sorry, I think that you do. I think you do.
yeah, I mean, the one issue is you're messing with the signal. You're scaling it. You're distorting it on purpose, but you're distorting it, and then you're using a lens to distort it again to try and get it back to where it was supposed to be originally. Folks like Joe Kane, who I happen to agree with all the time, don't like the solution because you've gone away from one-to-one pixel mapping. You no longer have a one-to-one of the signal. Each pixel that's programmed into the signal can go to a pixel of the display if you just leave it alone. As soon as you start using these anamorphic modes in the lenses, well, you've scaled it and stretched it and distorted the image. So the easier way, the cheaper way, is to just zoom it in. Yes, you will have part of the image being projected above and below the physical screen, but it's projecting black bars. So that shouldn't be a big problem.
Part of your resolution, and you're losing part of your light. I mean,
yeah,
it's not.
It's a
go either way.
When you zoom in the image tends to get brighter because you're now using a wider angle zoom. So, there's the trade-offs to it. I'm not a huge fan of anamorphic lenses because you need to get a really good one. There are cheap ones out there that are plastic that have all sorts of problems that create artifacts in the image or don't stretch the image back out perfectly. So you need to get a good one, and they're not cheap. So just using the zoom is often called the cheap, the poor man's anamorphic lens, right? Just using the zoom on the projector to zoom it in and fill the screen. That's the poor man's solution because you don't have to pay for an expensive lens. That's really good. The other issue is, do you want a lens that is in front of the projector all the time, or one that moves on a motorized or a manual sled back and forth? Because some movies are not going to be 2.35 to 1. Some of them are going to be 1.85 to 1, or 16 by 9, or if it's a really old movie, it might be 4 by 3. Do you want to always be using processing that now, when you're watching a 16 by 9 movie or a 1.85 to 1 movie, it's actually going to insert black bars on the left and right. It's going to stretch the image vertically and then insert black bars on the left and right so that your lens, which never moves if it's a fixed lens, will stretch it back out properly, but it'll only be 1.85 to 1 or 16 by 9. So again, you're messing with the signal and you're doing all kinds of weird things, and the other thing you could do is just move the lens out of the way when it's 16 by 9. So it gets complicated.
You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't have a motorized lens if at all possible. The fixed lens is sort of a nightmare. But then you're only really using it when you're doing your 2.35 to 1. Everything else just comes out flat. It comes out straight. But anyways, whatever.
Long story short, Tom likes the fixed screen, one screen, in-wall speakers, using an anamorphic lens. I like dual motorized screens so that I don't have to deal with masking, and I can have whatever speakers I want. I can choose an acoustically transparent if I still want the speakers behind it, or I can choose just a regular non-acoustically transparent screen and use the drop-down, the motorized drop-down, so I can still have my center speaker physically below the screen. So I like a dual screen setup, and I like to use the zoom instead of an anamorphic lens. So two opposing views,
there you go.
Pluses and minuses to both.
All right. Crosshatch pattern when bright images are projected onto perforated screens used in full-size movie theaters. Like I said, he was sitting pretty close. This is called moire. A lot of times it's like a rainbow, or especially in motion you can see it. It's sort of fun in an awful sort of way. Do woven screens available for home use have that same problem? I don't believe so, Rob.
Yeah, by and large, no. This is definitely the thing that causes it is the pattern of little holes in the screen. Those little holes in the screen, of course, end up looking black. And if they're large enough that your eye can pick them up, you get this weird crosshatch moire artifact that shows up in some images, especially things that have vertical lines, like if you're looking at a picket fence or something like that. It'll look weird and wavy instead of proper. So the bigger the holes are, the more noticeable they are, the more this effect will happen. The woven screens, the holes are so small in those screens, and we now have acoustically transparent screens that are meant for 4K resolution. and the holes in those things are tiny. They are so small, and you just don't get that effect with that type of screen anymore. So just look for the smallest possible holes you can find if you want to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, I don't. These days, I wouldn't worry too much about it, but it sounds like he wants to sit awfully close to this thing. His last question is he'd like to use dual subwoofers, but the midpoint on each side wall won't physically fit well. Okay, he wants a big screen up front, so that probably is part of it. If he uses the midpoint on the front and back walls, what's the best way to make it fit with the center channel and the screen? He could do 4 subwoofers, one in each corner, but he'd have to use less expensive subwoofers. First of all, you don't have to use 4. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's got a thing where he's got to have, if he puts one in the corner, he has to have all 4 corners. You just have 2 corners, right? You don't have to have all 4 corners.
Diagonally opposite corners.
That would be just fine, okay? But that being said, you just slightly offset. If you're going to use the center, if you're worried about the center channel, if you're using the acoustically transparent screen, like I said, you don't have to worry about it because the speaker's in the wall. It's up high. You don't have to worry about it. Use a stand if you're going to use a regular speaker. You probably put it pretty near the floor in that case, and then you put your subwoofer off to the side, to the left, the left or right side of that, and on the back wall, you just offset it a little bit to the other side so that they're opposing each other, so that they're kind of meeting in the middle. Their sound is meeting in the middle. We've talked about that last week a little bit, I think. So there's no reason why you have to have 4, dude. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that
it is awesome.
If it doesn't fit with the budget, then get 2. Just put them in opposing corners.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention is cylinder subs. Hooray, cylinder subs!
I almost said that too. Yeah.
Yeah, because cylinder subs, first of all, if they're going in corners, they fit really nicely in there. They tuck in there without drawing too much attention to themselves because they're tall and slender. But the other thing is, if you're talking SVS, you can lay the cylinder subs on their sides, meaning it'll only be 16.5 inches tall instead of the 22 or 23 inches tall of the similar box model. So that's actually something I've considered myself. If I wanted a subwoofer on my front wall dead center and a subwoofer on my back wall dead center, and I was worried about the height of the center speaker if I'm not using an acoustically transparent screen, or just worried about not having enough height between the top of the subwoofer and the speaker or the screen, the cylinder subs, you can lay them on their side, lay them down, and then they're a lot shorter than a box sub. So that is another way to go.
Yep. Todd, we're going to get you next week, dude. This is it.
Yep.
All right. So much for not going for 2 hours. You can reach us at avrant.com. That's our website. I'm too tired now. Facebook.com/avrantpodcast. You can comment there as well. Email Rob at rob@avrant.com, tom@avram.com. I'm slurring, though I haven't had anything to drink. I'm just tired and sort of nauseated. Rob's, you can get him on Twitter at @FirstReflect, and I'm at avrant_Tom.
Yes, and I don't have a recommendation for this week, but I do have a plea, which is, I know most people listening to this probably have no interest in watching it, but So You Think You Can Dance is in danger of cancellation.
No! I'm going to talk over top of you two. Stop talking about that show.
So please just record it and watch it within 3 days on your DVR so that the ratings will go for that show. Because I love that show so much. May 28th, Wednesday, on Fox.
You ever want to watch a mass exodus from Twitter? Watch Rob start posting about So You Think You Can Dance, and just people just unfollow him like crazy. It's all right, dude.
I love that show so much. I don't want it to go away.
Oh my
Please
God!
help me save it. Please help me.
Everybody watch one episode for Rob, please. Thank you. And then somebody tell me why our Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. sucked so bad tonight. All right. Keep your questions coming. Thank you so much, Steve, for your support and for all of our listeners' support. We will see you next week. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Mandry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something. You are fading, dude.
I am so tired. I couldn't sleep last night. Woke up way too early. All right.
We're still alive.
I know we are. All right, guys. We're not gonna. I know we have 14 viewers. Okay, I'll do a quick hangout.
You can always just start it and then go. So.
Okay, we'll see you guys in a few minutes.